Hey friends, welcome back. Today's episode, we'll be meeting Jamal Carter, a 34-year-old former community organizer turned accidental legal warrior. When his late mother's fully paid-off home is suddenly foreclosed, Jamal finds himself alone in a courtroom, facing off against a powerful bank and a smug judge who laughs at his attempt to fight back. But here's the twist, Jamal isn't just any man. He's about to expose a fraud so big, it shakes the entire system. Buckle up for this gripping showdown. Like, subscribe, and stick around, tons of powerful stories are headed your way. The courtroom was thick with tension, the kind that made the air feel heavy, like a storm was about to break. Overhead, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over the mahogany judge's bench. The polished floors gleamed, reflecting the anxious shuffle of reporters in the gallery, their pens poised for what was expected to be a routine humiliation. At the center of it all stood Jamal Carter, shoulders squared, his worn charcoal gray suit a stark contrast to the custom-tailored silk of the men opposing him. His fingers rested lightly on a manila folder, his only weapon in a war that had already cost him everything. Across from him, Stephen Calloway, the bank's top attorney, lounged in his chair, exuding the kind of arrogance that comes with knowing the system is built in your favor. Next to him, Darren Klein, the branch manager who had coldly dismissed Jamal weeks ago, whispered something under his breath, chuckling like the outcome was already decided. And from the bench, Judge William Preston, an aging white man with a smirk carved deep into his weathered face, let out a low chuckle. "Representing yourself, Mr. Carter," he mused, tapping his gavel lightly. "This should be entertaining." A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Jamal didn't flinch. He met the judge's gaze, his voice steady. "I'm not here to entertain, Your Honor. I'm here to win." The laughter faded. And for the first time that morning, the room went completely silent. The paper was still warm from the sun, but the words on it were ice cold. Final notice. Property must be vacated in 14 days. The red ink bled into the page like a wound, screaming at Jamal Carter as he stood frozen on the front porch of his mother's house. The early morning heat had already begun to settle over Atlanta, thick and suffocating, but it was nothing compared to the weight pressing against his chest. His fingers curled around the notice, crumpling the edges, but no matter how hard he gripped it, the words didn't change. A gust of wind rustled the peeling white paint on the railing, carrying the distant hum of lawnmowers and car horns, sounds of a neighborhood moving forward, while his world was being ripped apart. His mother had fought for this house. 2 jobs. 30 years. Late-night shifts at the diner, aching hands scrubbing floors for rich families who never learned her name. She had died believing the house was safe, believing she had won. Jamal stepped inside, the scent of lemon cleaner and old wood wrapping around him like a memory. The living room was exactly as she had left it, her favorite crocheted blanket draped over the armrest, the framed mortgage payoff notice still proudly displayed on the shelf. It had been her moment of triumph, the day she burned the last loan statement in the backyard, laughing, free at last. But now, in his trembling hands, a new statement existed. A second mortgage. Signed in his mother's name. Only one problem. She never took out that loan. The hold music droned on, a looping melody of soft jazz that felt like a slow death. Jamal Carter sat hunched at the kitchen table, the weight of the phone pressing against his ear as he stared at the eviction notice beside him. The red stamp glared back like a final warning, daring him to believe this was real. His knee bounced impatiently. The second stretched, the silence on the other end of the line only broken by the occasional robotic voice, "Your call is important to us. Please stay on the line." Jamal's grip tightened. 32 minutes. That's how long he'd been waiting, each second stoking the fire in his gut. Finally, a sharp click, followed by a woman's monotone voice. "Foreclosure Department, Lexington First Bank." Jamal exhaled, steadying himself. "Yeah, I'm calling about an eviction notice on my mother's home, Dolores Carter. There's been a mistake." A rustle of papers. A tired sigh. What's the property address? He gave it to her. Another pause. More clicking keys. Then the words that sent ice through his veins. The account is in default due to non-payment on a second mortgage taken out 3 years ago. Foreclosure proceedings are final. Jamal frowned. That's impossible. My mother never took out a second mortgage. A long silence. When the woman spoke again, her voice was laced with detached indifference. Maybe you weren't aware of her financial situation. Jamal's jaw clenched. I have every document right in front of me. The mortgage was paid off. I have the deed. Sir, she said, slow and deliberate, as if speaking to a child, the second loan exists. The bank has the paperwork. Foreclosure will proceed as scheduled. Jamal's pulse thundered in his ears. I want copies of every document related to this loan. You'll need to file a formal request with our legal department. And in the meantime, it won't stop the eviction. The line went dead. Jamal sat there, gripping the phone, staring at the framed photo of his mother on the shelf. It had been taken the day she burned the final loan statement, a bright flame licking away years of struggle. Now, someone was trying to rewrite that history. And he wasn't about to let that happen. The bank lobby smelled of stale coffee and polished wood, the kind of place designed to make people feel small. Jamal Carter pushed through the heavy glass doors, his mother's files clutched in one hand, the other balled into a fist at his side. The air conditioning blasted against his skin, but the fire in his chest kept him warm. He scanned the room until he found his target, Darren Klein, the branch manager, sitting behind a sleek oak desk, his tie loosened just enough to suggest comfort without sloppiness. Jamal strode forward, dropping the stack of documents onto the desk with a quiet thud. We need to talk. Klein barely glanced up, his smirk already in place. Mr. Carter. I assume this is about your foreclosure. Jamal ignored the condescension. My mother never took out a second mortgage. This signature, he jabbed a finger at the shaky scrawl on the agreement. It's not hers. Klein sighed, sliding the document back without even looking. Signatures change over time. People make desperate decisions they don't tell their families about. Jamal leaned in, voice steady but sharp. She was hospitalized the day this was signed. For the first time, Klein's smirk flickered, just a little. But then it was back, stronger. If you want to fight it, hire a lawyer. He shrugged. But you better act fast. You've got 2 weeks. Jamal stood there, pulse hammering. They knew. They knew this was fraud, and they didn't care. He turned on his heel and walked out. They thought he was powerless. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The legal aid office smelled like old paper and lukewarm coffee, the waiting room packed with weary faces, people fighting battles they were never meant to win. Jamal Carter sat stiffly in a plastic chair, his mother's mortgage file balanced on his knee, fingers gripping the edges like a lifeline. The receptionist, a woman with tired eyes and a voice that had long since stopped offering hope, barely glanced at his paperwork before shaking her head. We're at capacity. Try private counsel. Jamal exhaled slowly. I've tried. They either won't take the case or say I can't win. She offered a tight-lipped smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. Then you already know the answer. Outside, the Georgia heat wrapped around him like a vice. He walked to his car, except it wasn't really his. His old sedan had been repossessed last week. Now, he borrowed a friend's ride just to keep moving. He slid into the driver's seat, his mind racing. No lawyer. No money. No help. That night, his kitchen table became a war room. Mortgage documents, foreclosure statutes, legal cases, he devoured them, highlighter in one hand, coffee in the other. Then, at 2:37 a.m., he found it. A case. Peterson vs. Horizon Bank. A homeowner had beaten foreclosure by proving the mortgage transfer was invalid. Jamal's pulse quickened. He didn't need a lawyer. He just needed to know the game better than they did. The courtroom was a stage, and everyone thought they already knew the ending. The gallery buzzed with quiet murmurs as Jamal Carter stood at the defendant's table, the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. Overhead, the fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sterile glow over the polished floors and high wooden benches. His hands rested on the edge of the table, steady, despite the storm raging inside him. Across from him, Stephen Calloway, the bank's lead attorney, sat with his arms folded, a smug half-smile carved into his face. He barely acknowledged Jamal, his confidence dripping from every movement. Next to him, Darren Klein, the branch manager who had laughed in his face weeks ago, whispered something under his breath, his amusement barely concealed. And at the center of it all, Judge William Preston, adjusting his robe as he settled into his seat, let out a low chuckle. "Representing yourself, Mr. Carter." The judge tapped his gavel lightly, his voice carrying a hint of mockery. "This should be entertaining." A few people in the room chuckled. Calloway smirked. Jamal didn't flinch. He reached into his worn manila folder and pulled out 2 documents, stepping forward. His voice was calm, but his words cut like a knife. "Your Honor, the bank filed 2 versions of my mother's mortgage agreement." He held them up. "And the signatures don't match." The smirks faded. Judge Preston leaned forward, his brow creasing. For the first time that morning, someone was finally paying attention. The first blow landed the next morning. Jamal Carter woke to a phone notification blinking on his cracked screen, bank account frozen. Suspicious activity. His heart pounded as he tapped into his banking app, only to find his balance sitting at $0. Every cent, gone. Then came the next hit. His electricity shut off by noon. The hum of the fridge died first, then the air conditioner, leaving the house eerily silent. By sunset, the repossession notice appeared on his borrowed car, a tow truck idling down the street like a vulture waiting to feed. Jamal sat in the dim kitchen, his hands clenched around his mother's files, his mind racing. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a warning. The bank wasn't just fighting him in court, they were trying to crush him into submission. His phone buzzed. A text from Maya. "2 men came to my job asking questions about you. They looked official. What the hell is going on?" Jamal's breath caught. They weren't just coming for him now. They were coming for anyone close to him. His pulse thundered as he grabbed a flashlight and spread his documents across the table. They thought they could break him. Take his money, his home, his people. They didn't realize, they were just fueling the fire. Jamal exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The bank wanted to play dirty. They were about to find out what happens when you push the wrong man too far. The air inside the packed courtroom felt thick, heavy with anticipation. The gallery was silent now, no more laughter, no more smug glances. Jamal Carter stood tall, his manila folder clutched in one hand, his heartbeat a steady drum in his ears. Across the aisle, Stephen Calloway's confidence had cracked, his fingers drumming nervously against the polished table. Even Judge Preston, who once smirked at Jamal's presence, sat forward, eyes narrowed in something dangerously close to concern. Jamal took a deep breath and stepped toward the bench. This was it. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady, "the bank claims my mother willingly signed a second mortgage. But I have sworn testimony from the notary who allegedly witnessed it, she never saw my mother sign anything." A murmur rippled through the room. Calloway shot to his feet. "Objection." Jamal didn't stop. He reached into his folder, pulling out the final weapon. A USB drive. "I also have this." His eyes locked onto the judge's. A recording from inside Lexington First Bank, proving they knowingly pushed fraudulent foreclosures through the courts, expecting no one to challenge them. Judge Preston's face darkened. "Play it." The courtroom held its breath as the recording echoed through the speakers. "If we delay processing just enough, by the time they realize the signatures don't match, it won't matter." The voice belonged to Darren Klein. Calloway paled. Judge Preston's gaze snapped toward him, his knuckles whitening against his gavel. And Jamal knew, he had just turned the entire system on its head. Outside the courthouse, the sun hung low, casting long shadows across the steps as reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. The world had just witnessed the impossible. A man with no legal training had exposed a corrupt banking giant in open court. Jamal Carter had won. Or so he thought. As he pushed through the crowd, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A smooth, measured voice slipped through the receiver. "You should have taken the settlement, Mr. Carter." Jamal's grip on the phone tightened. "Calloway." "You lost," Jamal said, his voice firm but low. A soft chuckle. "Did I?" A pause. "The system doesn't fall because of one ruling. Banks appeal. Judges change their minds. Paperwork gets misplaced." A slow chill crawled up Jamal's spine. "You may have won today," Calloway continued, voice calm, almost amused. "But tell me, how long do you think you can fight?" The line went dead. Jamal exhaled sharply, his knuckles white around his phone. They weren't finished. They had billions at stake, connections in every corner of the legal system. This wasn't about a house anymore. This was war. He glanced back at the courthouse, at the cameras, at the people who had witnessed his victory. They thought they could scare him. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The system isn't broken, it was built this way. Jamal Carter's fight wasn't just about saving a house. It was about exposing a machine designed to grind people down, to strip them of power, wealth, and dignity, all while hiding behind legal jargon and corporate policies. The bank never expected him to fight back, because the system counts on people being too tired, too broke, or too afraid to resist. And that's the real lesson here: power doesn't belong to those who have money or status. It belongs to those who refuse to surrender. For every Jamal, there are thousands who never get their day in court. Families evicted over a forged signature. Elderly homeowners tricked into predatory loans. Single mothers forced onto the streets by banks that gamble with people's lives, knowing they'll never be held accountable. Jamal wasn't supposed to win. He was supposed to give up, disappear, become another statistic. But instead, he became the exception. He learned the game, played it better than those who wrote the rules, and proved that knowledge is the one weapon they can't take from you. So ask yourself, how many people have been robbed of justice simply because they didn't know how to fight? That's what the system fears most. Not a lawsuit. Not a courtroom loss. But people waking up. Learning the truth. And refusing to be silent. Because the moment people like Jamal stop being the exception and start becoming the rule, that's when everything changes. If you love this battle for justice, where Jamal Carter took on a corrupt system and turned the tables in a courtroom showdown, then buckle up, because there's so much more to come. Hit that subscribe button for the X Daily Stories channel, your front row seat to gripping tales that twist, turn, and leave you thinking. We're dropping fresh, cinematic stories every week, drama, suspense, and real-life lessons that stick with you long after the credits roll. Don't miss out, join our crew, turn on notifications, and dive into the next epic fight for truth. Follow us on X for daily updates and share your thoughts. Great stories are waiting, let's explore them together.